Welcome, everyone, to all your seekers, stargazers, and wanderers out there. I'm your host today with another episode of Signs, Planets, and Stellar Rhythms. I'm Erik Roth, shamanic astrologer, and we're going to be diving into some of the alignments that are coming up, in particular focused on Aquarius later in this month, in the month of March, and into early April of 2022. So I'm going to go ahead and begin that process. I'm looking forward to sharing more about what this all means for us. Okay, this is episode 32 of Science, Planets, and Stellar Rhythms. I call it an Aquarius frequency due to the dominance of the stellium that is in formation right now at the time of this recording and through the beginning of April, until Venus starts to migrate out, and then that'll start a process where most of the planets will begin leaving the sign of Aquarius at the end of by mid and later in April. So let's talk about what are the major topics today in this episode. Sign of Aquarius, obviously that's going to be the big thing, and the stellium. So stellium and the sign. I'm also going to be talking about Vesta's contribution, what Vesta brings to this, and just a kind of an end cap to this episode. The awakening continues, meaning the awakening of our consciousness and humanity's, you might say, evolution, if you will, through this age that we're currently in and into the next stage and what that represents there. There are certainly other videos that talk about that in more detail. And even at the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, Daniel Jumaro talks about it quite a bit too, as well. So those are some resources. I'll probably do something more concentrated on that later this year, especially as we're also in the center of this Pluto return time, which is, of course, a totally different video. If you want to check that out on my YouTube channel, the Pluto return, for the United States, feel free to go and take a gander at that. All right, so what is this unfolding alignment? Well, Mars and Venus both entered the sign of Aquarius on March 5th. Vesta entered it on March 10th. Juno, another asteroid that's actually already been there for a number of weeks, is still present there right now, and will continue to be for a few more weeks as well. Okay, now Aquarius, we're talking about the sign of Aquarius, not the constellation, even though the constellation part of it overlaps a little bit into the actual seasonal sign of Aquarius. So just to clarify that. Now Saturn, back in 2020, first ingressed or moved into the sign of Aquarius. That was just for a few months back in the very tail end of March 2020 for I think into late spring as when that took place. This is basically becoming the leading edge for humanity's laws, structures, and systems. This includes the Aquarian themes of technological development, inventions, humanitarian issues, bridging the intellect with spirit and attainment of knowledge beyond conventional and customary ways. Mars, Venus, Juno, and Vesta bring in additional incentive for humanity to know Aquarius more thoroughly. The human quality, meaning what it means to be human, the totality of who we are, and our inherent need to be able to touch the divine comes in with these planets and asteroid, kind of adds to what Saturn has already been involving itself in. So there's going to be more about this unfolding alignment later in this episode as I dive further into this. But just I'm going to show everyone some charts, and you can pause it when you need to look more carefully at certain things that I'm going to share. Feel free to do that. And I've got a little bonus chart that I'm going to share in the current times in which we're living in, with the major event going on in Ukraine. So I've got a chart to show you in that respects. Okay, so what does this look like as far as the solar system? How does that line up in Aquarius look? Well, if being on Earth here, we can see from our perspective, Venus, Mars, Vesta, and Saturn all lined up in here. Juno's in there too. I don't have a marker for that, but I added Vesta to this to make it so that we can actually see the major players here. Pluto is off to the side here. We have Neptune and Jupiter getting really close to each other, and you can't see Uranus in this picture, or like Mercury is behind the sun here, at least from this particular angle of the image. So that's quite what it looks like. And that's again, this is the end of March that we're looking at, not the current time of this recording, which is March 18th. All right, so from another perspective of being on Earth, what the sky looks like here. All right, so March 28th, I pointed this particular one out because this is when the moon is there. And the moon is there on the 27th and the 28th, but I put the 28th in there because it lines up with Venus and Saturn, which are essentially in conjunction right there. I've got that whole circled. And this is all, I mean, this whole constellation, the goatfish right here, or the sea goat, is all in the sign of Aquarius. So all of these planetary bodies, including Vesta over here, Juno is not shown on the screen, but it's in this area where Venus and Saturn are. And you can see the moon down below the ecliptic here. So there won't be an occultation of any of these planetary bodies this time. But this is all in the tail of this goatfish. And this is fascinating. This is something I've been studying for a while now. Since Jupiter went in there last year. And this constellation is a kind of a bridging of worlds. We have the world of solidity and matter and earth, quote, earth energy, in the body and the head of the goatfish. And then we have the aquatic area of the scales and the fish part of the goatfish, or the sea goat. And this is kind of the merging of worlds. So it's partly dipped inside the cosmic waters, the goatfish, and partly on land. And it's pretty apt in the experience of where we are today. And there's going to be more about that at the end of this video, where I talk about spending just a few minutes talking about what is quote so-called age of Aquarius that we're in. And this is the kind of epitomizes that, because we're in this powerful time of Aquarian energy. There have been other times where Aquarius has been really prominent, like in the early 1960s as well as the early 90s. So we're going to get into this a little bit more as we dive into the sign of Aquarius and what that means. I'm not going to talk too much about the history of Aquarius and different times. That could be a totally separate maybe podcast or video, but this is just kind of giving you an idea of this, because these stars here that are right at the tail of the sea goat, or the goatfish, Nashira and Deneb Algedi. Deneb Algedi is a Bohemian star, one of the quote 15 magical stars in history. Caitlin Castell and I did a whole webinar series just based on the Bohemian stars, with Deneb Algedi being strongly a part of that. And this is where Jupiter was strongly spending a few months in this area of the sky. Jupiter's now way out beyond the water bear, actually, and moving closer and closer to the fish constellation as it prepares to enter the sign of Aries in May, and conjunct Neptune on its way through. But these two stars represent a certain cosmic wisdom and fortune, according to traditional astrology. And so there's a certain level of, I say, we can even call it good vibrations, but it's more like good tidings, something where a sense of bringing up things that you want to fulfill, want to accomplish, and ideas and insights, and maybe even potential breakthroughs of synchronicities that happen to align just perfectly. That these stars have a certain connection to that space of good tidings and the transformation from the element of water onto the element of earth. So it's a really powerful area of the sky, and it just so happens that these planets are migrating through that area. So it certainly shows up in a pretty profound way. And with the moon coming through, that's a really powerful activation on the 27th and 28th of March. All right, let's take a look at the sign of Aquarius. This has certainly been, you either love it or hate it. There's some that, because Aquarius was looked at in, the 1950s, 60s time period, 1970s as this, sort of this, the highest level of signs. And, this is what you want to be. Aquarius was this trendy type of energy, and as with the synonymous with the age of Aquarius. But there's, of course, every sign has its, you might say, its light and its shadow, or its healthy expression and its unhealthy expression. So in the body of knowledge that is shamanic astrology, Aquarius is a seasonal sign or archetype. The sign symbolizes a part of the human desire for change, breaking from traditions, innovation, experimentation, humanitarianism, a sky level perception, and expanding our consciousness beyond where we find ourselves. So something that really takes us beyond that sense of just this, what we might be attached to as our identity, like something that exists on a cosmic level, that we're part of something even greater. Now, there's other signs like Pisces and Sagittarius that also kind of connect into that zone through different ways. But Aquarius is all about the mind and the intellect's consciousness connection to that particular sphere. So Aquarius comes directly after the seasonal sign of Capricorn. It is part of the archetypal journey through the entire zodiac. So Aquarius's ideas crack open the foundations that Capricorn is to promote the need for change. And Aquarius teaches us that without innovation, adaptation, and change, systems and structures built even on the strongest foundations can decay, eventually passing into dust. Unless it's something really that stands for humanity, stands for the knowledge, like some of the megalithic structures out there on the planet. I mean, eventually they will turn to dust in tens of thousands of years from now, but they stand for as living libraries in our relationship with the earth and the cosmos. So no sign or archetype is totally good or totally bad. All archetypes / signs have roles on the great wheel, and Aquarius can swing from extremes of providing a sense of enlightenment to a disconnect of the physical form and all the complexities that come with it. So essentially an abandonment of the physical form, or what it means to be human, instead of just pure energy. So the energy part is just as important as the matter, which is also our direct connection to the Earth Mother itself as well. So more about Aquarius and the perceptions. How can Aquarius be of help, and what more can be shared about it? Ideas. This is the primary strength of Aquarius. Aquarius, we could sometimes say the same with Gemini, but for Aquarius, it tends to come into a space that revolutionizes the kind of ideas that come into play here that we're talking about. So it's born from the element of air. Aquarius is of the mind's connection with the cosmos. Generally, it is a setup for the knowledge to come and more radical revolutionary ideas, and through unorthodox experimentation. So novelty is the key word for this sign. Also contributed by Aquarius, or that Aquarius contributes, and is said in another way, is a sense of cosmic fairness and peace activism through the image of the high witness or high observer. So being able to see from a higher state of being, a higher plane, and being able to go, hey, wait, we're all human. we're all brothers and sisters. There's no class, there's no caste in this from the Aquarian, at least from an ideal perspective of the Aquarian dream. It doesn't mean that that's a reality. It's just like trying to filter down, like, well, how do you make that a reality? And this is going to be talked about a little bit later here. Now, there have been people that have, very famous people that have had Aquarius in their charts very strongly. And I just list a few here: Charles Darwin, Albert Einstein, Susan B. Anthony. She was very profound Aquarian being, and of course, John Lennon. So we see how powerful of an impact that they had on the world, and that they were well ahead of their time in their thinking. And Susan B. Anthony didn't live long enough to see, and here in the United States, for the constitutional right for women to vote. So she had passed on, and prior to that, emerging into the world. So, and John Lennon, certainly had his dream around this, and Albert Einstein's work with physics, and so profoundly today associated with brilliance and the intellect. And he was more than just about rational thought. That, if you read more about him, he had a certain sense of mysticism with him that was very different than we might think of with when it's just E equals MC squared kind of thing. All right, so let's take a look at some other things about extremes of Aquarius. Well, every archetype or sign has their extremes for humanity, and one extreme for Aquarius involves the relationship Aquarius has to the physical body or the physical form. Aquarius is all about the mind and consciousness. And it is vulnerable when it comes to the sensitivity with the body. This can spark experimentation through the uses of spiritual and or physical technology to detach completely from the physical body, which can come in the form, and I've seen this happen where it's more not, it could be extreme where you're not taking care of the body and you're just focused on the mind's ability to work with things and to let the body go and to see that deteriorate. And or like trying to deny the body, just in an utter denial of what that represents, which could even be. In fact, I have I think another statement in here. I don't know if it shows up in this particular slide here, but the denial of that. Oh yeah, here it is. So another extreme is the not denial of the shadow and becoming overly light polarized. And I've actually encountered an individual that actually stated that specifically, that there is no shadow, and it's a complete denial that that doesn't exist. That in fact, the person was essentially telling me that to even look at the past, or even to try to look at it as from a perspective of what you've done, is that it's not a place to go to. And so we just keep looking forward and keep looking forward and keep looking forward, which is all great. But in order for us to truly learn and to grow and evolve as human beings, we definitely need to have a healthy incorporation of what the shadow means for each of us, as well as our culture and our communities. Experimentation technologically also is another extreme, or otherwise that can be taken to extremes without a more holistic understanding or empathy of people or other life on the planet. So essentially doing things through experimentation or innovation without a conscious awareness or an ignorance, perhaps even, of what it might do to people, to human beings, and even especially their physical form, what that means, and even perhaps even our spiritual desire for what we want, rather than just everybody living in a particular Aquarian bubble. Something deeper and richer into that. And there can be an extreme level of Aquarian expression that can go to that place. Okay, and this is a slide I captured from the last video that I did about Mars and Venus and Pluto, which was migrating. Mars and Venus were in Capricorn, and they ingressed into sign of Aquarius, and I talked a lot about the qualities of Mars and Venus with this, and Aquarius and Capricorn, and what this represents. So I'm not going to talk too much about, repeat a lot of the same things, but I will talk about this, which is the slide about, in particular, Mars and Venus and their experience into the a sign of Aquarius, especially here in the month of March. So inquiries or questions we can ask ourselves is, for us, what is our definition of freedom of thought? What does that mean? So something we can look to and think about, because when you say the word freedom, what does that truly mean? Because in its rawest form, freedom to do what one must, freedom to do what thou will. But if that is the case, that brings up all kinds of scenarios. So it's something we got to take a deeper look at, and not just if we only had just only freedom, what kind of a world would that bring in? And or if we had a more balanced word or balanced version of what freedom is, meaning that the other signs, the other players, the roles, the archetypes of the wheel, the great wheel, they also come into play. They contribute too, and that's what brings us into that holistic image. That Aquarius is just one expression here. So how can we adapt to the rapid shifting and prepare ourselves mentally for radical changes? So this is a powerful Aquarian question, adaptation. And because we are in a time of acceleration, if you will, a quickening, as some have called it. Another bullet point, this is an invitation to be novel in our lives. So this time period here that we're talking about with Mars and Venus and Vesta and Juno and Saturn, and meaning like to try new things that support new healthy experiences, but also to kind of understand where we can forge ideas into a reality as well. And then what can we do to act in our local community to also support humanity on a global level? So acting on local and ultimately supporting globally, because our actions now, today, in today's world, have really powerful ramifications across the sphere of the earth. And so it's something we need to keep in mind when we live our lives. Like what kind of impact are we having there? And especially our relationship with Earth. So now we're going to look at some charts. And this is a chart I showed in the last video, episode 31. And we can see here, this is from March 5th. This is just after Mars and Venus entered the sign of Aquarius, only about 2 degrees away from Pluto and Vesta at that time. We can see Juno having already entered Aquarius, and Saturn and Mercury here. Mercury's now moved off. It's in Pisces right now at the time of this recording, here in mid-March of 2022. So this is sort of the start of the process. And what I've been finding, this is something I want to share here, and it's certainly been interesting. And this is not about getting into the politics of things, but in the current war that's going on in Ukraine, that with Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and unprovoked, essentially. But I might add also here that Aquarian response to this has been fascinating. There's certainly more here than just Aquarius, but it's been fascinating to see, especially the humanitarian part of this. Of course, when humanity has any kind of disaster, certainly since I've been alive in modern times, there has been a powerful global response to those disasters, such as the earthquake in Indonesia many years ago, 2005, I believe that was. Other places that have had really powerful disasters like Hurricane Katrina in the US, and fires here locally in my a community where I live in Southern Oregon back in 2020. But this Ukrainian war part, the world has shifted. Most of the world, the majority of the world has shifted to a place of being of support to the tragedy, the crisis that's unfolding there in Eastern Europe. And the image of Ukraine as a sovereign nation, as a nation of quote democracy, or trying to become more of a democracy, if you will, a true democracy. So the idea of that and the humanitarian response to support that has been great, and especially to the suffering of the people there, just incredible under the storm of war. Getting those supplies there and doing whatever it can to make sure that things reach those places, or trying to under the guns and the bombs. So this is kind of an Aquarian image here. This is like, hey, this we need to have that kind of support system in addition to Pisces, the Neptune, Jupiter, Sun, and Pisces. That's also a strong player in this giving. For Aquarius, it's more like, hey, this is not right. This is a sovereign entity, and we can't do this. We can't, invade or destroy another nation. So we have all this Aquarian energy that is in the atmosphere, in the field of response. And we're seeing that play out a lot here. Aquarius also, as a sign, tends to be associated of of all the signs in the zodiac, that would be the sign that would be most closely associated with the idea or the concept of governance by democracy. And there was a image after Tiananmen Square back in the late 80s. That disaster there, it was 88 or 89, somewhere in that zone, that the Chinese people erected a statue called the Goddess of Democracy. And it was their symbol to what they thought was a revolution at that time in China that never fully manifested. But the idea is still there, is still present, and that symbol is still in the minds of others. So this is the Aquarian part. Now, ideally, it's a beautiful image, but it's just trying to put it into practical use, trying to bring it into a space where there's a certain level of fairness and where there's no class or caste, and the freedom of expression, the freedom of thought, all of that, the freedom of voice. So these are a lot of the issues that have to do with Aquarius. There's also the issues of technology that I talked about as well, issues of expansion of consciousness. So all of that is playing a role, and we can see coming later this month at the end of March, we can see here's this alignment, almost an exact quadruple conjunction of the Moon, Juno, Venus, and Saturn on March 28th. This would be the evening time here on the Pacific coast, Pacific Daylight Time, and the mid-evening time on the East Coast. And it would be more on the 29th in other parts of the world, especially in Asia, East Asia in particular. So this is just something to have an awareness of, that this is an energy, an alignment that's going to become stronger, the greater in the field. So as this, as that war continues to deteriorate, meaning more destruction, more people dying, and more suffering, there's a certain a greater response to with Aquarius and Pisces in response to the crisis, to the disaster that is happening there. But also, I've seen with this is something that I'll also talk about when I talk about Saturn later on here, that has to do with the environment of Earth. And then we can fast forward to April 4th. This is when Mars and Saturn are conjunct. And you can see Venus is a day away from entering the sign of Pisces, and Juno only a couple of degrees away. Vesta is about 11 degrees Aquarius by then. So it's moving slower. And in fact, that is a topic for another time, but Vesta is this year, later this year, Vesta's going to have an opposition with the sun, which means any year that happens, which is every 16 to 17 months or so, this is when it spends a lot of time in one sign or a border of two different signs. In Vesta's case, it'll be Aquarius and Pisces. So that's something that I'll be talking about in relation to its with Saturn later this year. It'll be a separate topic altogether, and some of the same issues will carry into that space. Okay, so Saturn. All right, so Saturn is a key player here. It's a slower moving planet, so it's something that sort of I want to say it siphons, but it can help create, for especially in Saturn's case, a foundation for Aquarius to be expressed. And the intent is to see a balanced view of humanity, and even idealistically, without class, caste, or hierarchy. And Saturn shows us the rules and laws that govern our lives in the context of all of this, the idealism that's in play. Perhaps this is also where the ideas meet the decaying operating manual of humanity in order to forge a new one. And that's that word, I chose that word purposely because forge is something working with matter, something working with the density and iron, and certainly with and other kinds of metals. Certainly with Saturn, you could say Mars being in Aquarius as well. We can say those metals are strongly in play here to bring thought and ideas and consciousness into something tangible here, instead of just being out in the dreams. So Saturn reminds us that time and work are necessary to the forge to create what we want, and that thoughts and ideas and will need Saturn's commitment to have a sustainable future. And one of those is I say in the paragraph before this is supporting an Earth level constitution. Born in the reality of what we can dream into existence. So it's almost as if we as humanity have an agreement, have some, you might say, transcendental, or what word I want to use, transcending agreement with the planet Earth in a way as if it were a party that we were connecting to, that we have some it could be a document, it could be a sacred grove that we dedicate to the Earth, it could be something along those lines that becomes that part of that agreement. And something, again, I find fascinating. I did a podcast, Rhythm of the Stars, and you can find it in most of the different places that you can find a podcast, including Pandora and iHeartRadio and Google and other places. But the third podcast I did back in late February, was about environmental awareness and what is the astrology behind that. So in the West, our awareness in the environment increases strongly whenever Saturn is in the sign of Aquarius, especially since the 19th century. And this is, again, we're talking about Western culture here. We're not talking about, because certainly they had an awareness of that in many native cultures throughout the world about many thousands of years ago. But this is the West coming back around, circling back to that same place and going, hey, wait, whoa, what are we doing to this planet? We can't keep going this way, or else we'll not only destroy the planet, but we'll destroy ourselves. So here's where the evidence that I found was Saturn Aquarius playing a powerful role in our environmental awareness. And when Saturn is aligned also with Neptune or Uranus, this also happened in the early 90s when Uranus and Neptune were having that conjunction, and Saturn breezed through that area in the early 90s too, in Aquarius. This seeded the whole original international, the precursor to the Kyoto Accord back in 1997. The one before that was in, I think it was 92/93, somewhere in that zone. And that was when Saturn was in Aquarius and when Neptune and Uranus were strongly present in Aquarius. That's when it started to really catch fire as far as the awareness goes. So there's more to go. In fact, there was an international agreement that was forged last week about plastics, to cleaning up plastics in our environment and having a more investing in more recyclables. And it was the first time that internationally that an agreement like that has ever been made, and that was done in Nairobi. So to me, even amongst all the quote bad news that's out there, we see something like this, and we say, "Wow! I mean, the intent of this is amazing. Let's see if we can actually act upon it. Let's see if we can actually have less destruction of the planet through, in this case, plastics." So that's, to me, is very positive. And I'm looking at the Saturn in Aquarius, and then with Mars and Venus and Vesta also in Aquarius, helping to promote this and connect us to that greater awareness. All right, so what else does Vesta bring in? This is something I'll talk more about in a future episode, but just a couple of major points here in pink. Vesta rides Aquarius from March 10th to May 24th. So and spends much of that time, about a month with Venus and about 5-ish weeks with Mars. So Vesta represents the sacred hearth within. And on a cosmic level, it's like this unconventional scientist, wizard, theoretician, and maybe say spiritualist, if you will, all wrapped up into one kind of archetype. And it isn't from a scientific perspective of what we think of science today, but more about what we experienced thousands of years ago, long before the so-called Age of Reason. So it's the sense of the observer and how we may detach from ourselves, and in order to do that, so that we can fully see ourselves as an unbiased witness. I had experiences of this just in my own self and my own body, spiritually speaking, at times when I had an illness, at times when I was just in a heightened state of tension and crisis, being able to see myself as an observer, and through that and realization, going, wait a minute, I could gain perspective and gain new types of avenues that I might be able to decide upon. That ended up becoming really helpful for me. And so there is a sense of more spiritual service with Vesta, meaning how can Aquarius be of service in the world? How can radical revolutionary thought show up to assist humanity with a touch of the concept of universal love? So that kind of goes into the, I mentioned John Lennon had that spirit of Aquarius in him. I always think of this, when I think of a certain version of Aquarius, I think of John Lennon and the song Imagine. It's a really beautiful song, very idealistic, of course, but it points to the potential of like, oh, can we create some version of that? It doesn't have to be perfect in that way, but what can we do to bring that into form, or dream that into form without ignoring the reality of our lives? So this is something that we can all explore in our own personal selves, and how we can be of service, and how we would want to treat our brothers and sisters and others out there in the world. So with Mars and Venus in Aquarius too, this could be a way for communities to come together in sacred response and highly unusual and revolutionary ways. So the sacred hearth of Aquarius itself, burning the sacred fire, and the sacred fire touching the cosmos. This is Vesta's contribution. All right, now here's a little snippet. This is, we don't have Vladimir Zelensky's chart as far as their birth time goes, his birth time. We have his birth date and where he was born. But he was born with the Sun, Venus, and Aquarius, conjunction less than a degree away, opposite his Mars, and to a lesser extent his natal Sun in Leo. when I look at this chart, I see a person that is meant to shine the revolutionary and almost a sense of democratic light onto the world. Like he is. This is just a little preview of an analysis, but I feel definitely that he's made for this moment. And if he's able to make it through these next few months, he's going to be moving into his Uranus opposition, which is a time of great breakthroughs for the person. And so it's possible he may have some additional insights and an acceleration of his life path in the months to come. So, and with the Leo, strong Leo energy, he knows how to lead. He knows what it takes. He knows what to say. So he has that capacity. It doesn't mean he's infallible, by no way, but there's something here, a burgeoning spirit. And, I like to see this healthy Zelensky person keep coming through, and hope that there is that he does continue to shine in a way that is healthy for these archetypes that show up very strongly in this chart. Again, this is just a snapshot analysis of his natal chart, and he was also born with Uranus squaring his moon, and kind of a little bit kind of a loose orb with squaring his natal sun and Venus too. So there's a lot of that strong Uranian energy in his chart, which can make him also unpredictable and unconventional in the way he approaches life. He was a former actor and comedian, so he really knows. And I do believe also later this year there's also a powerful Mars transit over his natal Jupiter in Gemini that may also reveal some additional insights here coming up in the summer and fall. Okay, 2022. Okay, so the awakening. So the so-called age of Aquarius, this is just a brief look. Astrologically and cosmologically, this is about the turning of the ages. Daniel is somebody that Daniel Giamaro mentions this a lot. And this happens when the great wheel of the sky turns all the way around due to the wobble of the Earth. One of the many movements that the Earth has, rather than just spinning and tilting and orbiting, it also has a wobble and other movements in its orbit that make it even more dynamic. So in popular culture, this has been translated to the age of Aquarius because the equinox point, vernal equinox, March equinox, is starting to migrate away from the constellation of the fish into the constellation of the water bear, which popularly known as Aquarius. But it hasn't quite reached there, at least not yet. However, we are in a powerful turning of an age from one 26,000 year period to another. And this aligns up with a researcher, Vibhu Dev Misra, who did a lot of research about the yugas in his article, and about the end of the Kali Yuga. And it's in 2025 when we transition from the Kali Yuga, which is right now the ascending dark age, to a 300-year transitionary period before we get into the Dwapara Yuga, which is seen as a corresponding Bronze Age. So we're in a huge metamorphosis, huge transformation right now, transition, which is intended to be very messy. And the 20th century, by far, very messy century, and the 21st is also very, very messy. So we're at the beginning, we're at the end of a world age, which doesn't mean total annihilation, because it means also the beginning of a new world coming into form, a new hope, if you will, a new something inspired, something emerging, an awakening, if you will. So this awakening isn't quick. It isn't you just wake up and everything's, in an ideal atmosphere, it takes a long time for humanity to move these billions of people into that place and over multiple generations. And we're in that space now. And that's where there's a lot of people holding on to what is old. What it doesn't mean it's bad, it just means that the story is completed and it no longer can really function more fully in this particular time. And then some want to rush the new stuff in before it's ready. And that's where it can get also challenging. So this is where the all that messiness is happening. And that's the chrysalis stage of where we are here in the world. All right. So I just want to thank everyone for watching this video. You can find me at inspiralnexus.com, and I've got upcoming classes and events that I'm doing in the spring and summer. So stay tuned for that. I've got a new podcast called Rhythm of the Stars. So look for that. And I've got a new series, also webinar series with Kaylin Castell that I'm doing at mystaralchemy.com. And you can also visit shamanicastrology.com for these. There's a new webinar out there about the March equinox, and then we one for the June solstice period with Daniel Giamara, which I'll also be a part of coming up. So again, thank you all for being a part of this, and happy equinox to everyone. And I'll see you at the next episode. Take care, everyone. Peace.